I'd like to say that I entered the field of journalism in the early 80s as a trainee in a premier institute in journalism in Delhi. Worked there briefly, but quickly found that journalism as practiced in those times was not conducive to young women from South India to work. Even though I got an opportunity to work in the mainstream magazine called, a newspaper called Hindustan Times, I came down south hoping I would find an opportunity to work in Bangalore, which had then several English editions of local English newspapers. But I found to my surprise that when I put in my application with really top qualifications, I didn't even get a response, no rise at all from any of the newspapers that I applied to. But there was one weekly called the City Tab, which gave me a space, and so I was a regular contributor to them as a freelancer, as a stringer. But then that gave me an interest in issues relating to human interest and features, social issues, and I have continued, therefore, though not in mainstream journalism, I continue to be actively involved online as well as in several listservs and e-groups as a participant. And several of my articles are now available in the public domain because I decided early that though mainstream journalism was not my field, I had to be a voice for the voiceless or those who had no voice. And therefore, those issues form a core part of my writing. And I have, much later in my life, towards my middle age, I would say, I discovered that I have an identity I had not known about, and that was that I was being seen as a Dalit. But I did not know that I had Dalit ancestry. This is this reality. And it is amazing, but this happened only because I reached a situation where you were competing on equal terms with other privileged communities. And then when you're excluded for no reason, no rational reason, then you begin to question that. And that's how I discovered that indeed there is that Dalit ancestry that I carried, which somewhere people recognized, but was not informed about. That is a story by itself. You might read that story in one of my online articles. But in this context, I would like to talk about two or three very simple and directly issues that impact the Dalit community as well as mainstream journalism. One is the portrayal or non-portrayal of Dalit women in the mainstream press. Most of the times we see Dalit women's stories as portrayal as victims of very severe rapes. Everybody knows about the Kailanji Bandara in Bandara, the family that was very, very violently killed, lynched by the entire village. Now, this did not make it to the mainstream press till the youth in that area had to shut down the highways and protest for 5 days until the issue started slowly being reported, not because it was an issue, but because these protests were happening. And that's how. And in December 2004, 2003 and early 2004, there were a series of 16 rapes of Dalit girls in Haryana. And that was in the context of people struggling for land. But then when these women got together and came to Delhi to protest, there were hardly any coverage in the mainstream press. And not only that, there was even the women's organizations, though it was widely reported in the press, each individual issue was reported here and there. That entire pattern was never critically analyzed as to why that is happening, except in the alternative press. So this is something that has to be taken note of, whether it is a mainstream women's movement, which totally obscures the concerted public and very severe sexual violence perpetrated on Dalit women, whether they are landless and agricultural workers or whether they are professional women in cities. That is one. The other thing is the portrayal of the issue, the very live issue of manual scavenging. Up to now, they still are over 100,000, almost 200,000 manual scavengers, majority of whom are women. And this condition only occurs to Dalit women. The women of no other community are imposed upon with this task. But this is not at all highlighted or worked upon. There is a law that has banned it for decades, and there are crores of rupees that are supposedly allocated for their benefit, but neither the mainstream press nor the alternative media take cognizance of such huge violations of and concerted long-term violations of Dalit women's concerns. Lastly, I'd like to end on a note of positivity, and that is that despite the mainstream press not being active in these areas, there has been an attempt, at least now in the younger generations, people in their 20s and 30s, who are the fruits of the children of middle-class Dalits who got the advantage of reservations in the public sector. Those children who've been through Kendriya Vidyalaya schooling or went to college, they are now going into universities and becoming research scholars. So the first generation of people, Dalit youngsters coming into higher education, are beginning to create their own forums. And so we have a very vibrant forum called Roundtable India, which is an online forum for this category, and I've been part of it since its inception. And there's another one called Savari, which had to go underground and become private because it was a special platform for Dalit and Adivasi girls, marginalized girls in higher education. But there was such a lot of severe trolling by people who targeted that group and individuals in that group who were actively the admins in that group, that it had to go private. So these are all the realities of the Dalit experience encounters in the media.